We know you all are big fans of podcasts, so we got a great recommendation for you. It's called Talk Easy with Sam Fragoso. And I can't believe we only just discovered it. James recently appeared as a guest, and it's something you have got to listen to. Here's a quick highlight from when James was on the show.
God love politics. And the one thing you can say anything you want about politicians, and to some extent it's true. I mean, they go maniacs, and some of them are less than honest, and they say or do things to just get elected. Some of them don't have much. But the one thing you can't, at the end of the day, they matter. What they do matters. From how fast you drive, to where you stop, to the amount of taxes you pay, to the health care you receive, to peace and war and everything. When you have a life in politics, the one thing that you never have to ask yourself is what I'm doing matters to people, because for good or ill, you know it profoundly does.
Yeah, I did that with Sam out in Aspen, and he's a lot younger than me. And
most people are, Jay.
Well, right, and he's a little more progressive than I am. I'll leave it at that. But he's very knowledgeable. He's very curious, and he's very polite and on point. And I got to pick it up and listen to it myself. It's he's good. It's good. It's thoughtful. He gets a lot of different guests. I'd recommend it to anybody.
Talk Easy is a weekly podcast where people truly sound like people, featuring intimate, long-form interviews with filmmakers, comedians, activists, politicians, actors, and many others. Just search for the Talk Easy podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. You also can go to talkeasypod.com. Again, search for the Talk Easy podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening now. You also can find the show at talkeasypod.com. Look for the link in our show notes. Hello and welcome to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. This week our guest is senior CNN political analyst and the senior political editor at The Atlantic and one of the great political journalists in America, Ron Brownstein. Remember, we love taking your questions, so write into politicswarroom@gmail.com or send a tweet to @Politicon for next week's show. Now, we're going to get to as many as we can, but don't forget to tell us where you're from. Please tell your friends about us and remind them to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. As James Carville said, we have struck it rich today. There is no better political reporter and analyst in America than Ron Brownstein. Ron, we're almost a week out from perhaps the worst presidential debate in history. Let me run my view of the Biden debate debacle. I think it's similar to James by you. I believe it was far more damaging than earlier poor performances by Obama in 2012 or even Reagan in 1984. It was deeper than just a bad night because the president reaffirmed the fears of some supporters and swing voters that he's too old. He seemed bewildered, lost his train of thought, incapable of countering Trump. I don't think this is recoverable. Please tell me I'm wrong.
I don't think you're wrong. I think it was clearly the worst debate showing by a candidate from either party in the debate era, going back to Kennedy Nixon in 1960. And I have trouble even describing it as a bad performance, in the sense that a bad performance is when you forget your facts or flub your lines. I think many of the Democrats I have spoken to, and I don't think they're wrong, believe that what we were watching wasn't a bad performance. It was a medical episode, right? I mean, it was not that he kind of got tangled on a zinger that he was trying to memorize. It was that he could not express a coherent thought for roughly the first half hour of the debate. It got better at times, although it was bad again at the conclusion. But I felt this goes beyond the notion of a bad debate. I mean, this was kind of an unveiling of a problem that is deeper than anyone around Biden has let on. And to me, the real danger here is, as you said, I mean, the most dangerous thing in politics is to confirm a pre-existing concern or supposition. I wonder whether you can erase what voters saw, even if you have better performances down the road. I think most people understand that if you're having issues, cognitive or physical issues as you age, as almost all of us are going to, that it isn't necessarily bad every day. I mean, so like there's a good day negate the evidence of the bad day. Once people know this card is in the deck, Al, how do they react to the idea that on any given day you might pull this card out of the deck? That to me seems what is irreversible.
Yeah, look, we're so fun and we're so pleased to be able to talk to you. Let me ask one more question. Then I'll just throw it open. We'll have a conversation. Just jump in, James. Too, I've seen some finger pointing from, I guess, some of the Biden family blaming staff. Look, I think this is a much too insular group. They didn't let any outside talent in, but it wouldn't have made any difference given Biden's performance.
Absolutely. And it wasn't right. It wasn't like this was a guy who was stumbling because he could not sort out which of the many facts had been kind of crammed into him over the previous few days. He could not articulate a thought in the early parts of the debate. He could not complete a sentence. He could not deliver an argument. And of course, for many Democrats, the tragedy is that Trump's performance showed why he's still vulnerable. The idea that there's like a new Trump with a broader appeal was completely exploded. That debate. He did nothing to expand, and in fact, probably made it easier for Democrats to claw back some of the younger non-white men who have been drifting toward him. But Biden could not do that. Biden could not press an argument. You couldn't follow what he was saying. Often you couldn't hear what he was saying. And I don't know if you can unsee this. Don't forget and I'm sure James feels this way too. The core here, the foundation of why did this debate exist at all in June, right? It existed because the Biden campaign felt they were the ones who had to change the trajectory of the race, that they were not on a trajectory to win. And they needed to shake things up. And instead, as you said, they confirmed one of the two biggest vulnerabilities he has, along with inflation, which is this supermajority of Americans who worry that he's too old for the job now, much less for 4 more years. Many of those people who believe he's too old for the job, or believe he has done a poor job, or believe that inflation is a serious problem will vote for him anyway because they view Trump as unfit and unacceptable. But that is not quite enough to win. And the real question the Democratic pollsters and others that I talk to now is, how does he get those last few points of votes who do not view Trump as an existential threat to the country based after that performance? And I think that's the real issue. When Trump said, if I shot somebody at Fifth Avenue, I wouldn't lose any support, that's basically true on both sides. I mean, there's only so far you can fall in modern politics, given the negative partisanship toward the other side. So a collapse isn't likely. But the question for Biden is, if you were trailing going in the places that matter, where do you go now to get those last few points of votes that you'll need?
James, jump in.
So Rod, I don't think I actually agree with this, but I have a point on it for it. I think there's a good chance that when the Ron Brownstein does the kind of final analysis of the 2024 cycle, that Thursday night was a blessing. If they would have held us out and would have had this on September the 28th, we'd really be fucked. At least we have some maneuver room here. Difficult, messy, but it gave us something we would not have had before.
I think. Well, look, I mean, there is now the chance to do something, and as we talk, two things are true. One is that there is not, and I am struck, there is not any coalesced core effort among Democratic interest groups and donors to press for an open convention or for Biden to leave, given the stakes in this election for every part of the Democratic coalition, the absolutely existential threat of Trump. It is striking that there is not an Allard Lowenstein type thing going on. Allard Lowenstein from the fall of '67, trying to organize a movement to push Lyndon Johnson out of the election. But having said that there is no organized anything, and I can talk at some length, having interviewed a lot of people about why that's so. It is true that the absolute dam is cracking as we speak, and more individuals are raising questions or openly calling on, Lloyd Doggett. I mean, it's not exactly Chuck Schumer. Tim Ryan, former House member, Democratic Senate candidate in 2020. Mike Quigley, Sheldon Whitehouse raising. I mean, so you're beginning to see the first, pebbles falling. Do you get an avalanche after that? Seems to me possible, but you still have enormous hesitation among the loudest, biggest voices in the party about coming out and saying publicly what they are saying privately, that they think it is very hard to recover from this. You can't say impossible, which is important because Trump is still Trump. But I think, James, do you think there's anybody who believes Biden's odds of winning haven't diminished significantly as a result of this debate?
Not even Jill.
No.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
I think that Lloyd Doggett, I was Lloyd Doggett's campaign manager in 1984.
Against Bill Graham, right?
43. Against Bill Graham, right. I know Lloyd well. Paul, there's a couple of things to remember about Lloyd. First of all, he's been in the Congress for a long time. He is very connected to the entire left of center progressive infrastructure, labor unions, teachers. I mean, he's a quintessential 1980, Walter Mondale kind of Democrat, but probably even more liberal. He did not, and he's very smart. He's very valuable member of the caucus. Tim Ryan's a good friend, but he's not even office. Quigley is but Lloyd, he didn't do this on his own. All right. He ran the traps. He didn't wake up and tell his wife, Libby, I'm just going to go say something. That's not the way he operates. He called the AFL-CIO people. He called the Sierra Club people. He called the NARAL people. All right. This is more significant, I think, than meets it's just not another congressman from Texas.
Well, I've talked, what I've really focused on the last few days, I've tried to talk to a cross section of people in the party. I've talked to the senior most official at 5 major constituency or advocacy groups with scale in the party. I've talked to several large donors. I've talked to several pollsters and strategists working in the key swing states. Every one of them believes that, Biden now faces long or impossible odds of getting those last few points. As I said, the White House is kind of saying, well, look, he hasn't collapsed, and a couple polls out today have him behind, but not by much more than he used to be behind. But like the view of all of these people, almost all of them that I talk to, is the same. It's like, well, you're behind. You've now deeply reaffirmed your biggest vulnerability, or maybe your second biggest vulnerability after inflation. What is going to allow you to move forward, like to gain ground? And of course, the other thing, which is not even unspoken, and people will say it, they just won't put their name on it, is that no one has any confidence this won't happen again before the end, before the finish line.
How can it not, Ron?
Right. That the whole White House campaign argument, well, it was a bad night. Well, if it happens again, and arguably it has happened in private and even to some extent in public settings. There are a lot of the furthest, I think, short of Lloyd Doggett and Mike Quigley and Sheldon Whitehouse and Tim Ryan, the furthest most people have been willing to go, I think, is to say, look, okay, you're saying this is a one-off. go out and show us, do town halls where you take questions, do interviews with the media. And none of that is happening this week. I mean,
he can't do that, Ron. He can't do that.
And that is the point, isn't it?
So Ron, this afternoon, your cell phone, you look at it, Jeffrey Goldberg. If you also don't know, he's the editor of the Atlantic. And he says, Ron, I need 1,200 words in 4 days on if Biden drops out, how should the Democrats go about this?
Yeah.
All right. So what's your starting point here?
Well, I think if he goes out, if he drops out, there's going to be a lot. I mean, look, part of the reason more opposition did not develop to him sooner running again is that many Democrats feel they have a Kamala conundrum, to coin a phrase, where they are deeply uncertain that she can win, but also deeply worried that bypassing the first woman of color on the national ticket and picking somebody else who would almost certainly be white could tear apart the party. So if Biden got out, I think there would be a lot of influential voices who would basically try to shut it down before it began for Harris. I was struck, James, as I'm sure you were, that Tim Ryan, who does not swim in waters that are usually hospitable to her, said, let's go with her. Jim Clyburn said, if Biden drops out, we should unify behind her. I am told that is the message of the House leadership. I don't think at all Democrats would agree with that. The question is whether any of those who would be perceived as better alternatives would be willing to step into the ring against her for 6 weeks in such a racially fraught contest. I mean, does Gretchen Whitmer, Josh Shapiro, Gavin Newsom, Roy Cooper want to take that on or not? So while I think there is definitely an audience, I can't imagine it's more than 50-50 among Democrats would want her or not want her as the nominee. I don't know if someone big enough to deny it to her would actually take the risk of entering a race that would have such racially fraught kind of overtones and, face the challenge of beating Trump. I mean, what do you think? Do you think Gretchen Whitmer or Gavin Newsom or Roy Cooper or Mark Kelly would be willing to do that?
What I think will happen, and I'm just giving you what I think, there's going to be an immediate, and I think they're working the phones right now, and there will be an immediate thing is we don't need this. It's a woman of color, the most essential part of our coalition. She was the vice president. And this is a messy process that we don't need to go through. That, I think, is going to happen. And people are getting a little bit where Tim is, I mean, maybe that's the inevitable result. However, I don't think everybody's going to stand aside. I think that's that, and the people that would challenge her are way skilled enough to answer that question. All right, they're not. They're going to, they'll have good answers to it. Hold on,
Ron. I would just add, I'm dubious of that. Gavin Newsom might want to challenge her. I don't think she's anywhere near the strongest candidate. I think someone like Gretchen Whitmer would be a far stronger candidate. But I think the bloodbath, given all the trauma of if Biden should drop out, and the odds, I think you would agree, are that he won't. But if he should, I think the idea of a bloodbath would scare most Democrats away. And then the question would be whether, she can pick a good running mate and good people to run a campaign. But it's not going to be pleasant.
I tell you, if Whitmer or I have trouble imagining someone beyond Whitmer or Newsom really denying her the nomination in the scenario we're talking about, which is still the least likely scenario. Although I would say not impossible, right? I mean certainly, what we saw from Biden was powerful enough that I don't think you can rule out ultimately enough Democrats raising questions that he can't ignore it. Don't forget, I mean, one thing to keep in mind here, but to finish this thought, I think if you get beyond Whitmer or Newsom, I have trouble imagining anybody else beating her. I'm not even sure they could beat her, but I don't think I don't think Roy Cooper or Mark Kelly is going to beat her. In fact, I don't think a white man is going to beat her. Like, I think. Is there another white Amy Klobuchar? I mean, is there another?
No.
I mean, I'm not sure anybody other beside Whitmer.
I got to tell you what people are going to say, what I would say, and the Democrats are going to agree with this. Look, she deserves consideration. We have to go through the test. We don't know. All right, we're not confident that she's up to campaigning against Trump. And the way that you determine that is to have a contest.
And I think that's from the demand side. Like, I totally agree with you that there will be donors, delegates, activists who say that. The question is the supply side. Does one of the candidates with the stature to actually beat her think it is worth taking the risk of being dragged into this conflict with the first woman of color on the national ticket? And as I said, I don't know if it goes beyond Whitmer and Newsom in terms of people who might make this.
Yeah, and I can't imagine. I'd be surprised if Whitmer did it. I wouldn't be surprised if Newsom did it. That scenario, James, would have worked back in February, but now we're talking about 4 or 5 weeks. That's just too short a time.
I don't know, but I would say this, and maybe no one gives a fuck. I think it would be a terrible idea to nominate her without having people take a look. Mm-hmm. Okay, I think Democrats, and I just think y'all I think you overestimate. It's certainly going to be important. The Harris people are certainly going to say, "How dare you to challenge?" But Democrats, what our nature is, you're not the boss of me, all right? And that assumes that this party is a lot more disciplined, a lot more organized, and a lot more sort of authoritarian than you would suppose.
I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you from the demand side. I think the problem is the supply side. I think the issue is not whether there would be an audience for someone else other than her, or that someone else could not actually beat her. I think the question is whether the someone else's who actually could beat her would put their name in the mix.
Why wouldn't Gretchen? Let's assume I don't know. Gretchen Whitmer wants to be president. She thinks that she could beat Harris. What does she have to lose? She's in a second term. All right, it's not going to be, probably in 2028 they would say you challenged, would hurt her. And but I don't buy that.
Okay. James, let me come back to the fact you're not talking about a couple months or primaries or caucuses. You're talking about 5 weeks. And what forums are you going to have to determine who's good? I just think it's not realistic.
Well, actually, I mean, Al.
Okay. I disagree.
Look,
I think this thing comes open to people are going to say, "Fuck it."
Go ahead, Ron.
Look, me and Al are the kibitzers here. You've actually done this, so I have due deference to that. And I do think that if Biden steps aside and it's a multi-candidate field, there would be forums quickly set up of some kind for people to make their case to the delegates and to the Democratic Party more broadly. And I also completely agree that there would be an audience for alternatives to Harris, that not all Democrats are sold on the idea that even if Biden steps aside, that she has any better chance. And that is one of the reasons why there hasn't been more pressure on him, as I said, to begin with. What I think is that what I'm not certain of is whether the candidates with the stature to beat her would feel that the odds of doing so are worth the potential of embittering, one of the absolute foundational constituencies of the Democratic Party, Black women. I mean, you have someone like Clyburn already saying, like, if Biden steps aside, we should unify quickly behind Harris. I don't agree. I agree that not all Democratic delegates and donors would say that, but I do wonder if someone like Whitmer or Newsom will say, you know what, better not to get those scars. Let her take this run. It's going to be really hard. People are
James,
unhappy
let him
about
finish.
Y'all are.
Yeah, people are unhappy.
Okay, all right. I won't say nothing. I'll disagree with y'all.
Let her crash against the Trump wall, and I'll run in 2028.
I think you're both missing the big fucking point here. The other side gets to play. So what is the other side going to say? I had 5 people run against me in the primary. You know what? We didn't try to run them out. We had Nikki Haley. We had Ron DeSantis. And the Democrats authoritatively just go along with everybody. They don't have a primary. They shut everything down. It's going to be a fucking disaster in the general election if you say no one can dare challenge her. The other side always gets to play.
Yeah.
You don't get to do this in a vacuum. And Democrats are going to be traumatized. They're going to be scared. And it's just not that simple. I'm sorry. I'm like Justice Sotomayor. Yeah,
no. I mean, look, would Whitmer be a stronger general election candidate than Harris? I think the likelihood is high that she would, particularly given the necessity of the 3 former blue wall Rust Belt states in the way this is unfolding. But whether I'm just questioning, I'm not questioning any of your logic. I mean, everything you just said is correct. It's just a question of whether the candidates who would have to do this would accept those risks themselves. I mean, it isn't really us who have to say that what you're saying is right. It's like Whitmer or Newsom, and I guess we'll see if
let's you mention in passing Trump, and lost in all this, I think, is that Trump, if in isolation, had a terrible debate performance.
Yeah,
he lied repeatedly. He claimed how perfectly he handled COVID, claimed he didn't have sex with a porn star. Of course, he paid her $130,000 to keep quiet. But I guess he didn't suffer any real damage, Ron.
Well, he did not, well, first of all, he had a bad night. And more importantly, he kind of punctured the balloon, the idea that there's this new Trump with like a potentially broader appeal and a more presidential demeanor and all of that. He was, he lied. He made, comments that could easily be viewed as racist, black jobs, Hispanic jobs. He took credit for killing Roe v. Wade and said everyone was. There was nothing in that performance that would have expanded his audience, and in fact, a lot that a Democrat, more coherently pressing the argument, could have turned against him to try to win back some of the wavering constituencies. If you now this may be changing post debate, but until the debate, Trump's improvement since 2020 has almost entirely been among younger Black and Hispanic voters, especially men. I mean, Biden's support among white voters and older voters have been holding up very well until now. And so, the idea that he did anything in that debate to kind of consolidate his connection with those voters is absurd. And of course, that only adds to the anxiety among Democrats. It wasn't like Trump came out of this as some colossus who cannot possibly be beaten. He showed that he is vulnerable, even though he has advantages because of discontent with the direction of the country. But the evening, I think, even more emphatically showed that Biden has very limited ability to take advantage of those vulnerabilities, given his own.
So y'all know a lot of Democrats, a lot about the institutional Democratic Party. There's one group of people that I do know well, and that is the donor class. And the donor class ain't going to go along with this. Okay? Not the DCCC donor class, not the DSCC donor class, not the Senate Majority PAC donor class. None of the, I say none. 80% are going to say, this is a terrible idea. We want to have a voice in this. And can I tell you something? They're paid attention to.
Yeah, no, the donors I've talked to, it's interesting. I mean, it's like I was talking to the head of a major constituency group in the party in kind of the broad coalition. And they were like counting on the donors to rescue the party. I mean, it's like, their view is, I asked a bunch of the constituency group leaders, and I talked to the senior most people at a number of, kind of household name in the Democratic coalition groups. And they all said, we feel we can't go out. We will be ostracized by the White House, ostracized in the party. But we're really hoping for some version of, we're really hoping the donors or elected officials do. Of course, elected officials tend to be lagging indicators. There is one concentrated group of elected officials who have a lot at stake here. There are 7 Democrats running in states, 7 Democrats running for Senate seats in states that Biden now has a very reasonable chance of losing. And it is worth noting that in 2016 and 2020 combined, exactly 1 senator out of those 66 or 67 races has won a Senate seat in a state that voted the other way for president. So if you're Tammy Baldwin, Bob Casey, Jackie Rosen, Ruben Gallego,
Sherrod
Alyssa
Brown.
Slotkin, Sherrod Brown, and John Tester, you have a lot of skin in this game.
Yeah. Hey, let's talk. Wait a minute. We don't want to leave out the other big story this week, which actually affects this, and that is the Supreme Court. And I think they demonstrated anew this is the Republican Supreme Court.
Yes.
They showed appreciation to the Republican sponsors and made sure that Donald Trump would not be tried before the election, maybe never, for inciting an insurrection to overturn an election. They basically ruled that he is above the law. They tried to sugarcoat that, and Roberts said it wasn't. But I think this was an extraordinary decision. Ruth Marcus in the Washington Post, I think, got it right when she said, "This is the dishonorable court." Going back to Dobbs, that's been the case. But Ron, is this one of those elections where the court really is a voting issue?
Yeah, and look, I think in our modern divisions, this was the equivalent of the Dred Scott decision in the divisions of the 1850s, because the court not that there's been much doubt for the last few years, but the court so unequivocally aligned with the electoral interests of the Republican Party that it becomes impossible to ignore. I wrote in 2019 that John Roberts's supposed interest, which I guess is not supposed, his interest in the court not being seen as entirely partisan, extends only so far as cases that implicate the core electoral interests of the Republican Party. And then he is entirely willing to execute party line decisions, as he did on Shelby County, for example, eviscerating the Voting Rights Act. The fact that so much of our media describes this as an ideological split, the ideological split 6-3, and not a party line vote, shows how much trouble people have grasping the situation we're in, where this Republican appointed majority on the court is functioning as an arm of the overall political effort for the GOP, and in fact is winning victories over and over that they could not win through legislation. They could not ban abortion nationally. They could not have repealed the Voting Rights Act, in effect, nationally. And this court keeps doing it. It is a deep and deepening crisis, and one that has implications not only looking back, but looking forward. I mean, if you're Donald Trump and you're already talking about expanding presidential authority in all sorts of ways, including multiple ways in which he has pledged to deploy federal force into blue jurisdictions over the objections of the blue local officials, you are basically saying, I am untethered at this point. Certainly, Mike Johnson is not going to impeach you, if you send the National Guard into Chicago for whatever purpose. And the court is basically, I think you're right, made it functionally impossible to prosecute a president.
And Ron, to those who say this is just all ideological, I want to read a brief quote from former appellate court judge Michael Ludig, who was a conservative icon, almost appointed by Bush to the court himself. Just said simply, it can never be said that no man is above the law. The Supreme Court held that the president, and the former president in particular, is above the law, and he is the only person in America who is above the law.
Yeah. I mean, John Dean said, under these definitions, ordering the CIA to block the FBI's investigation into Watergate would not be a crime.
Right. James.
It is a staggering decision, even in the context of the extremely partisan agenda that this court majority has pursued. It went beyond what the Trump lawyers could have asked for. The idea that you can't introduce evidence of motive, or you can't introduce evidence from official acts to the case involving unofficial acts. It's a staggering grant of license at a time when Trump is already signaling that if reelected, he intends to push the boundaries, crash through the boundaries in his campaign of retribution. And, I don't say Dred Scott lightly, because, Dred Scott kind of made it clearer as Kansas did in the Kansas-Nebraska Act, that it was going to be very difficult for these two sections to coexist. And I think this decision basically will set off, especially if Trump wins and especially if Trump acts along any of the lines that he's talking about, will just create pressures in Blue America that are, John Roberts doesn't know what he has let loose, I think.
James.
Much like Pertaney.
So I'll ask, B comes before H, so you get to go first round. Is the Supreme Court the most powerful, game-changing issue in American politics since 1974?
It's the most powerful institution, without a doubt.
No, but I'm talking about effect on electoral politics and public opinion, just a single thing in the last 50 years. One thing.
What? I'm sorry. I'm not sure.
The court is an issue, Dobbs in particular, but now all of this. This is is this the most game-changing thing? In other words, if you didn't have this, what would be life without Dobbs and Brewer and all of this?
Well, look, we know, again today in the CNN poll, I mean, by a 20-point margin, people believe Trump is better on the economy than Biden, right? They believe he's better for their bottom line. The reason Biden has been, at least until now, within range is because so many voters look at the modern Republican Party as a threat to their rights and their values, and to the Trump movement as a threat to democracy. And now I think they will increasingly see the Supreme Court as a threat to democracy, as they should. I mean, this decision, I think, will stand among, this is Plessy and Dred Scott. This is among the worst decisions in the history of the court. And it is one that, like Plessy and Dred Scott, has enormous centrifugal unraveling power. Because if Trump takes them up on their offer, the idea that blue governors and mayors can simply accept John Roberts essentially said Trump could order the Justice Department to investigate and indict an opponent, and that would not be untoward. I don't think the half of America, I think that more than half of America does not want to live in that world. And I suppose if Biden doesn't drop out, they will cite things like that to say that they can stay in the race. My point from the beginning was that there might be a majority. There's a majority that's pro-choice. There's a majority who does not want to clearly, there's a majority that does not want to live in a world where a president has untrammeled power. But not everybody is going to vote on that. The last few points Biden needs are voters who probably don't think, or Democrats need, who probably don't conceptualize Trump as an existential threat to democracy. It's too amorphous. They have to believe that the Democratic candidate, whoever it is, has the energy and ideas to make their life better. And that's the risk to Biden. It's not, this is a floor underneath him, James, but it's probably not enough of the floor isn't quite high enough to win without some people who are not engaged, some voters who are not engaged in this fight coming along.
So, Bob, now but cell keeps going off. Someone texted me, and be fair, I haven't read the whole thing, but a story that Puck, a journalist named Peter Hamby, just posted that the White House took polling in swing states, and it was a disaster.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know. I don't think this guy would get something intentionally wrong.
He's practically my neighbor.
I'll sit down.
He's practically my neighbor here in Venice. So I'm sticking up for the California national political correspondent. Caucus. Look, I don't know about the White House. I have talked to pollsters who say that it's getting, it got worse in the swing states. And again, I don't know what is disaster. If you're down 2 in Wisconsin and Michigan and now you're down 5, to me that qualifies as disaster. I don't know if you can, like I said, when Donald Trump said I could choose somebody on Fifth Avenue, he really was talking about both parties. I don't know if you can collapse anymore. And so, like, the issue is if Biden is behind, and again, I think that the share of the electorate that views Trump as a fundamental threat to their vision of the country is big enough that Biden can stay in the hunt if he stays in the race. But where does he get those last few points? Like, where do those last few points come from? And after
according to your neighbor,
such polling would not shock me. It would shock me if he was like down 9 points in Michigan or something. It wouldn't shock me if he was down 9 points in North Carolina or Georgia after this.
No, but Ron, you mentioned if he was down 5 in Wisconsin. I don't know that he is, but if he is, he cannot win this election without winning the so-called blue wall. They're just, you can't come up with another formula. And Wisconsin of those 3 states is probably his best state. So if he's gone down 5 in Wisconsin, throw in the towel.
Well, of course, who so called it the blue wall in 2009? I always try to get my little royalty for coming up with the phrase.
I gave your wife credit. Was it you, really?
It was me. January 2009, National Journal cover story, the blue wall.
That's one of many, right? Let me just go back to the court.
But you're right. But Al, you're right. That is the point, right? Like, it's not as though he has a lot of options at this point. The pathway is largely sweeping Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. The 1 CD in Omaha, that gets you to 270.
Right.
Now, I think people who know a lot more about math than any of us have explained to me that even if his odds are 50-50 in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, which may be optimistic, even if they're 50-50, the odds of winning 3 coin flips is not 50-50, Right. It's 1 in 8. And that was going into the debate. So
let me just go back to the court just for a minute, because you mentioned Chief Justice Roberts. Linda Greenhouse, the great court reporter of the New York Times, had a piece a couple of weeks ago that Roberts has lost control of the court. That the court basically is controlled by, the Alito faction now. It seems to me that what Roberts has done and said, okay, if you can't control them, join them. And he is going along with these decisions and even writing the latest one. He stands the risk, I think, of being the most discredited Chief Justice since Roger Taney of the infamous Dred Scott decision. This is just, for a guy who had a pretty good reputation, it's been demolished.
I reading this yesterday, I was thinking, how different would this decision be if Alito wrote it? Right. I mean, Thomas would have disqualified the special prosecutor altogether. But on the issues of immunity, would it have been that different from Alito or Thomas? I mean, this went beyond what the Trump lawyers were asking for. And he created such a web of to get through, to charge a president that in practical terms, it seems almost, I'm not a lawyer, but it seems almost impossible. And again, it follows a long pattern where the electoral interest of at times he will break in a way that is, I think, designed to show that the court is not simply a partisan institution. That does not extend to cases where the core electoral interests of the Republican Party are at stake. There, he is entirely willing to execute party line decisions. And that is what we saw here. The idea that they would do something this momentous on a party line vote, which is the way to think about it, tells you everything about where we are. And this court has enlisted as a member of kind of the overall Republican political apparatus, delivering victories that they cannot win through the electoral or legislative process.
Ron, I got a text, not from a politician, but an old friend who's really, really smart, who asked, she said, with this ruling, could President Biden order SEAL Team 6 to eradicate Donald Trump as a national security threat? He won't, of course, but as an official act, he could.
Yes. Sotomayor said as much.
Right. James.
It's amazing, and I think the point that Al made, I think, Chief Justice Burger, certainly wanted, tried to get everybody together on these decisions, and they were all, even Rehnquist was kind of, aware of it. Roberts has crossed a real Rubicon, I think. And people say, and maybe they were right, he certainly did it on the Obamacare, Affordable Care Act thing, but he's just mentally saying, "Fuck it, I'm part of the team."
Yeah, no, I think there's no other way to view what's happening.
Right, he's crossed the Rubicon.
Well, I think he crossed it long ago. I think the pattern is, as I said, he wants to signal independence at times, but when it gets down to crunch time, he's perfectly happy to have party line votes in a way that is just staggering. So, and of course, again, the real implication of this is not looking back; it's looking forward. I mean, yes, they've blown up the case, and maybe the only thing that Jack Smith has left is to present his evidence in some kind of evidentiary proceeding before Chutkan on what qualifies as official and unofficial. But I've got to think the Supreme Court's going to find a way to stop him from doing that before the election. They may try to find a way to stop New York from sentencing him before the election. But all of that pales beside what could happen if he is reelected with this kind of signal from the Republican justices on the court. Boy. All right, guys.
Hey, Ron Brownstein, you're every bit as good as that. I mean, you're even better than advertised, and the advertisement was pretty terrific, James.
No. Yeah, there's nobody that has more respect for Ron or treasures a friendship with Ron more than James Carville. I know you.
Sure do, you guys. Albert. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay.
The number of church-attending Americans has dropped precipitously, about half of what it was back in the 70s. Louisiana and Oklahoma have an answer. Force it on school children. To the consternation of its favorite son, my co-host, Louisiana is requiring all public schools to post the 10 Commandments in classrooms. Oklahoma is going one better, mandating the Bible must be taught in the classroom. Any teachers who object can be fired. Governor Landry, whose ambition may exceed his IQ, got his wish to be sued over Louisiana's dictum. Think he may be looking for attention? Donald Trump has endorsed forcing schools to post the 10 Commandments, though he hasn't revealed how many he violated. 5, 7, 8. Ryan Waters, Oklahoma's education chief, says one rationale for forcing the Bible to be and be taught is it's a bestseller. Well, yeah. Another good seller, not as much as the Bible, is the Kinsey Report on Sex. Oklahoma school kids might really like that. The Bible is a great book, and the 10 Commandments are aspirational. But the real goal here is to brush aside our history of separation of church and state and try to indoctrinate school kids with the aim of furthering Christian nationalism. Those founders who wrote that remarkable document actually 248 years ago today would be horrified.
Well, you're exactly right. And, we're now abandoning the First Amendment. So that's what's going on. They'll probably sustain this in the courts. But what also would happen a few days ago, we've abandoned the whole idea of America. All right? And America was really an idea. And the idea was that, it was certainly imperfect at the time, we're equal under the law. No person is a king, no person is above the law. Well, right. That's out the fucking window now. Thank you. And the idea that George Washington's letter to the sexton at the Newport Synagogue, or forget that, or Thomas Jefferson's views on religion and the state. Forget all that. Right now, we're not just losing some war. We're losing the entire idea that the country is premised on. And it's just, I can't believe it. I mean, I'll be 80 years old, and it's no longer, and people say it, and it sounds like bullshit. It's no longer the same country. That's it. Period.
Yeah.
Period.
James, I'm afraid you're right. It's sad to say. And now for our listener questions, which we love because they are so good. They educate us, they inform us, and they really stimulate us in the best possible way. Tony in Larkspur, California, James, wants to know, is it possible for the Democratic leadership of Barack Obama, the Clintons, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and Hakeem Jeffries to coalesce and determine the best candidate team to beat Trump? I guess after they've had a meeting with Biden, supposedly.
Look, anything is possible, right? And my idea, but you can sort of have that one would be for Presidents Biden, Clinton, and Obama to get together and say, look, we're going to we should have 5 people speak to the convention. We should have 4 town halls around the country, or any mechanism like that. I think overwhelmingly Democrats would say, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's get behind that. It's the difficulty in doing this. It is difficult, and it could go wrong. It is a messy process, but it also could work, and we could win, which we're not on course to do now. So, yeah, anything is possible.
Yeah. Jason in Des Moines, Iowa notes that Liz Cheney spoke at Drake this spring, and during that talk, she said she would campaign against Trump in swing states, no matter the Democratic nominee, and wants to know if Rep. Cheney can bring over enough national security Republicans in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania to help us win those states. I think Liz Cheney can be a very small help. I think if you have a number of other people like Jim Mattis and his former national security advisors, John Kelly and John Bolton, and H.R. McMaster's, all saying that Trump is a threat to American national security. On the margins, if Biden can make this, if he's the nominee, a close race, yes, I would be for it. By the way, I would note that Trump once again said he is going to try Liz Cheney for treason. He said that on this week. I mean, for whatever Biden's problems, let's not forget Trump is a madman.
Nikki Haley got 30 in the Colorado primary. She got 22 in Indiana, places like that. I think it could be a little bit more than a small help. I think that like maybe 20% of the Republicans that really don't want to vote for Trump, that really don't want to vote for a Democrat. But man, that makes a lot of difference. You pick up another 25,000 votes in Delaware County or Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. You picked up a lot. And people are sort of open to it.
James, this is another one that I think is creating a lot of conversation. Nick in Billings, Montana, says our modern primary system has ceased to produce nationally desirable candidates. Short of returning to the he says 1968, it really was pre-1972, party boss systems, what are changes we can make to lower the chances of getting such a cringeworthy pair of candidates?
None. Okay.
I'm afraid you're right.
I'll give you my reason, because the current system, and I think it actually has produced pretty good results, really empowers Southern blacks, who are a huge part of the Democratic coalition. And I think that they've proven time and time again that their judgment is to be trusted. And if you went back to that, I think people in South Carolina, Mississippi are going to not be crazy about it, and I think they are one of the largest, most significant parts of the Democratic coalition. So I take it. I think your question has good intentions, but that's not going to happen. Because the way it's set up, it empowers people, and they're not going to give up that power, nor should they.
Yeah, I agree. The only thing small thing I would add that last time at the behest of the Bernie people, the Democrats lowered the number of congressional and state party delegates who are automatic delegates to the convention. That was a bad idea. They were only, I don't know what it was, James, 16, 17, 20%. That's peer review. I mean, those are the people who have to govern with a president, and they ought to be delegates to the convention. They're not going to turn around the outcome. That's just nonsense. That was a mistake, but that's not going to change the fundamental problem that Nick has.
These people never have a good idea. I personally find he certainly doesn't come across as that. But and I tell this to all of my progressive friends. The most important thing is winning the election. Now, Bernie Sanders, to his credit, has changed his mind. He used to say the most important thing is not winning the election, is having an argument. Fuck that. All right? And that was at the Bernie Sanders, let's have the argument and don't worry about the election. He has subsequently changed his mind. Thank you, Senator Sanders. I give you great credit for changing your mind.
He has, and he's been a real soldier in this campaign.
Has.
I think he deserves. I don't agree with some of the people he's endorsed in the congressional level, but he's been a real soldier on the national level.
He has, and he's part of our coalition.
Right. James, Steve in Howell, Michigan, says that Michigan 7 and Michigan 8 are two of the most expensive and competitive races in the country, but all the national attention is on the New York and California races. Why are congressional races that are holds for Democrats are not as sexy as potential pickup opportunities for Democrats? Steve, they both matter. You can't win. You're down, I guess it is 4 or 5 now. You have to pick up, at least a half dozen or so, and probably a little bit more of those Republican-held seats, and you have to hold most of your own. So I don't think one is more sexy than the other, although I think you're going to get more attention in a race you're trying to take over. But yes, those 2 Michigan districts are terribly important, but New York and California probably will determine who controls the House in 2025.
Yeah, I don't, but I kind of see where you're coming from. But because you read the press, and a lot of it comes out in New York and California. It's right there. But I don't about I think people are pretty plugged into what's going on in Michigan. And by the way, you got Democratic control in Michigan all of them down. You should be able to raise a bucket load of money.
Yeah, and a really strong governor.
Yeah.
James, from across the pond, Justine in London, England, says, can Biden change strategy to focus on his team as the main deciders? He can travel then with young blood, highlight how effective his picks have been, and how few ethical issues they have had. By the way, he's absolutely right about that. I mean, look at this. There's been almost I don't think there's been any ethical problems in the Biden administration. And in Trump, there was one not every day, but every hour. But, can he then contrast that to Trump's I alone can fix it nonsense? Your thoughts, James?
It's a very well-meaning question, but it's hard to run for president and say, I got a good team. I'm going to really listen to my team. That's just, I understand, but people are hiring the top guy. And you're right. And the people around Biden, let me stop something right now. They are not bad. They're not bad. They're good. In fact, they're good people. They are experienced people. But you can have the best pass blockers in the world. You can have the best receivers in the world. You can have the best coaches in the world. But if you can't hit the open guy, it doesn't do you any good. And that's the problem. There's nothing wrong with our offensive line. There's nothing wrong with our receivers. There's nothing wrong with the play calling. we just can't get the ball to anybody. And we have to just acknowledge that. And I get a lot of, well, if he changed, and then, you've done this so long. And when the fecal matter engages a rotor blade, the verdict is always the same. I don't know which comes first, the staff or the media, but it's always in that order. And they're not going to stop covering your age. And you have three staff that are short here: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And I don't think they're coming down to help you.
Be a good trio.
Yeah, man. Get up here for it.
James Scott in Albuquerque, New Mexico, asked if it would be a good idea for Biden to do a press conference and lay out his plan in a controlled environment. Scott, that's not a controlled environment. I'm sorry. I don't think Joe Biden does very many press conferences, and I understand why. He's very effective, as he was in the State of the Union, as he was talking about the Supreme Court, when he reads from a teleprompter, a controlled environment. But a press conference is not a controlled environment, even if you try to limit the participants and choose certain people. I must tell you, I was really nervous before the debate last week. I would be really nervous if he had a freewheeling press conference.
Yeah, again, thank you. It's a well-intentioned question. But if you just went out and did something like that, first of all, just knowing the way it works, you have to run a trap. So you got to tell Schumer and Hakeem, and you just can't say we're going to do this, and then you got to. It's going to be something that every congressional candidate, every senatorial candidate is comfortable running with, and they got so much other shit that they're trying to do. Well-meaning, good guy. It just can't happen. The mechanics of it are too elaborate.
No, I agree. Scott, it is well-meaning, but I just think it's difficult. I think Clinton or Obama could have done that quite easily.
Clinton and Obama could do anything.
Yeah, I'm afraid.
Okay, they could do it off the top of the head. You could tell, right. Go out and have a press conference. Tell us all. It'd been, fucking, we need to take a note. But you don't have. You had Tom Brady and Peyton Manning. Well, you don't have Tom Brady and Peyton Manning right now.
That's for sure. Our last question is from John in Chicago, who I think is a loyal listener and a loyal questioner, who asked, do you think when Trump announces his vice presidential pick, Kamala Harris should immediately schedule a debate with that person?
Yeah.
I think one is scheduled already, James, isn't it?
I think so, too. But why not?
Yeah. Yeah, no matter who it is.
Right, no matter,
She has questionable political talent, but she did well. She did okay in the debate against Pence last time.
Yeah,
so I don't think it matters much. But
I do have to say I keep hearing better things.
Yeah.
About her, and she's entitled to. People change, people evolve, and unlike President Biden, he's not going to evolve. She can evolve.
Yeah. James, I've heard the same thing. People tell me that Lorraine Voles, who I really don't know, has been her chief of staff for the last couple of years, and she has brought some order, discipline, and that it's a much better operation. So that's encouraging.
If something were to happen, and this process opened up, she would be one person that's definitely super worthy of consideration and to pay attention to.
Would have to be. Listen, those questions are great. Please keep them coming in. And if we didn't get to yours this week, I promise we'll try to get to it next week. It's a really hard choice to try to decide on which, say, 7 questions we're going to use because there's so many good ones from all over the place. So thank you very much. Hey, thanks for listening to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. Don't forget to send your questions for us by email to politicswarroom@gmail.com or tweet them for next week's show at Politicon. To keep up with us, subscribe to Politics War Room on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And check out our Substack at politicswarroom.com. James and I are constantly adding new content, so go take a look. Substack, Politics War Room. You can also find other shows you might enjoy on the Politicon YouTube channel or when you search Politicon on your favorite podcast sites. And remember, please rate the show with a 5-star review. We'll be back next week with another show as we continue our War Room planning.